Picture your income as water pouring into a bucket every single month. Steady, reliable, real. Now picture that same bucket riddled with hairline cracks along the bottom, so small you would never notice any single one of them standing still, and watch what happens over time. The water level never climbs the way math says it should. You keep pouring, the same amount, month after month, and the gap between what comes in and what stays stubbornly refuses to close. The water isn't going anywhere dramatic. It's not one catastrophic loss. It's just slowly, quietly, invisibly draining through cracks so fine you've stopped looking for them. That gap, the distance between what you earn and what actually stays, is what this video is about. And the most effective tool ever built to close it was invented in 1904 with a pen, a notebook, and no app required. One honest note before we go any further. This is an educational overview of a documented budgeting practice with more than a century of real use behind it. It is not individualized financial advice, and what you actually save with any system depends entirely on your own income, your own expenses, and how consistently you use it. What we can promise is that every source, every name, every cultural term, and every research citation in this video is real, checkable, and correctly attributed, because most content built around this exact topic recycles the same surface-level information without ever citing a primary source or getting the Japanese terms precisely right. We're going to fix both of those things today. Here is the specific problem that makes all of this necessary right now, in the specific financial environment most people are actually living in. Spending has never been more frictionless. A subscription charges while you sleep. A one-tap purchase ships before you finish the thought that started it. A contactless card payment takes less than a second and registers almost nothing in the brain that just authorized it. The tools your income runs through were not designed to help you save. They were designed to make the act of spending feel like nothing, and they are extraordinarily good at that job. The ancient bucket in our opening scene is not a metaphor for poor discipline. It is a precise description of what frictionless payment architecture does to a monthly budget when there is no counter system working against it. Before we name the counter system, we need to name the mechanism underneath the problem, because it has a real research history and it deserves more than a vague reference to psychology. In 2001, researchers Drazen Prelec at MIT and Duncan Simester at Harvard Business School published findings from a series of experiments studying how payment method changes spending behavior. Their core finding, which has been replicated and built upon in the decades since, is that paying with physical cash triggers a measurable neural response that card payments suppress entirely. Cash spending produces something closer to pain, not metaphorical pain but a genuine, documented discomfort signal in the brain's processing that acts as a natural brake. Card payments remove that brake almost completely, which is not an accident of design and is not a failure of willpower on the part of the person holding the card. It is a documented mechanism that operates below the level of conscious decision, and it operates on everyone, regardless of how financially disciplined they believe themselves to be. Understanding this as a mechanism, rather than a character flaw, is the first step toward building a system that compensates for it. The system that compensates for it has a name. Kakeibo, pronounced roughly Kakeibo, is a Japanese household accounting practice built around a physical notebook, a pen, and a set of 4 questions asked at the start of every month. Its originator, and this is a historical detail worth knowing precisely because it almost never gets stated correctly, was a woman named Hani Motoko, who in 1904 published the practice in a women's magazine specifically to give Japanese housewives a structured, autonomous method of managing household finances. Hani Motoko was Japan's first female journalist, and what she published was not a vague encouragement toward thrift but a systematic, repeatable framework with clear categories, clear questions, and a built-in review process designed to compound its own results over time. That 1904 origin is not trivia. It means this system has more than a century of real-world use behind it, and the fact that it still outperforms every app on a modern phone is not nostalgia. It is evidence that what it was designed to restore, friction, intentionality, the physical act of writing numbers by hand, is exactly what digital financial tools stripped away. The system opens with 4 foundational questions: asked once, at the beginning of every month, before a single dollar moves. How much money do I have available this month? How much do I want to save? How much am I spending? How can I improve? Those questions look simple on the surface, and they are simple, by design, because simplicity is not a compromise with rigor here, it is the whole point. A system that takes 45 minutes to set up each month will be abandoned. A system that takes 15 minutes and asks 4 honest questions will be used, and a system that is used is the only kind that actually works. After the 4 questions, Kakeibo divides everything available to spend, meaning the monthly income after the savings target has already been physically removed, into 4 distinct categories. The first is survival, the non-negotiable baseline of living, housing, food, transportation, medicine, utilities. These are not decisions you make each month, they are commitments that were already made, and they get their own bounded space in the notebook precisely because treating them as ordinary spending obscures how much of your income is already allocated before any choice enters the picture. The second bucket is optional, and this is where the real work happens, because optional is the precise word for everything that feels necessary but isn't. The coffee that became a morning ritual. The streaming service running in the background while you watch a different one on a different screen. The delivery fee on a meal that would have cost a third of the price assembled at home. Optional spending is not the enemy, and Kakeibo does not treat it as one, but it does require that you see it clearly, name it accurately, and decide in advance how much of your monthly budget it is worth. The optional bucket is where the war between the current version of your financial life and the version you want is actually won or lost, not in the dramatic categories, but in the accumulated total of dozens of individually unremarkable choices. The third bucket is culture, a category that most Western budgeting frameworks either ignore or bundle into entertainment. In Kakeibo, culture gets its own space because spending on books, on courses, on experiences, on expanding your own understanding of the world is treated as genuinely distinct from passive consumption. This is not a small philosophical distinction. It changes how you categorize an evening at a lecture versus an evening at a casino. Both involve spending money. One is investment in yourself that compounds over time. The other is not. Kakeibo draws that line not to moralize but to make the distinction visible and trackable. The fourth bucket is extra, the category for what doesn't fit the others: one-time purchases, gifts, seasonal expenses, the costs of unexpected events that arrived without scheduling themselves. Most budgets collapse not in the predictable categories but here, in the things that feel like exceptions every time they happen despite the fact that some version of them happens every single month. Giving extra its own container converts it from a category that constantly surprises you into one you can actually anticipate. Before we go any further into how the system runs month to month, there is a cultural concept underneath it that gets misidentified in almost every piece of content built around Kakeibo, and it is worth naming correctly, because Japanese culture distinguishes between things that get confused constantly by outside observers. The philosophy woven through the Kakeibo practice is Matanai, written in Japanese as a compound character expressing regret over squandering, a deep cultural resistance to waste, to using something poorly, to letting the value inside a thing go unrealized. Matanai is the reason a Kakeibo practitioner does not discard a notebook before it is full, does not buy a replacement before a usable item has genuinely worn out, does not let a purchase disappear unused into the back of a closet without feeling something about that. It is a relationship with objects and money built on the premise that things have intrinsic value worth honoring, and that wasting them is a genuine loss, not just an accounting one. The term you may hear in this context from other sources is monozukuri, and it is worth distinguishing the two clearly. Monozukuri is a real Japanese concept, but it refers specifically to the art and craft of making things, a manufacturing and craftsmanship philosophy used primarily in industrial and engineering contexts. It is not the anti-waste, anti-squandering philosophy underneath Kakeibo. That is Matanai, and getting the term right matters if you are going to use it in front of an audience that will search for it. Back to the mechanics, and specifically to the element of Kakeibo that most directly addresses the Prelec and Simester finding we opened with. Because the notebook is physical, because every entry requires picking up a pen and writing a number by hand, the act of recording a purchase reintroduces exactly the kind of friction that card payments removed. You cannot simply tap and forget. The entry requires your attention, your time, your handwriting, and your acknowledgement that a specific amount of money moved from your available balance into a specific category. Over time, this physical act of recording begins to function the way cash payments used to function before the world shifted entirely to contactless everything, as a reliable, low-level signal to the brain that something real was exchanged. It does not eliminate spending. It makes spending feel like something again, and that shift alone changes behavior in ways that simply looking at a monthly bank statement never quite does. The 30-day wish list is one of Kakeibo's most practically powerful mechanisms, and also one of the simplest to use immediately. Any non-essential purchase that presents itself during the month, anything the optional or culture bucket will be asked to fund, goes onto a written list before any decision is made. The date of first wanting it gets recorded next to the item. After 30 days, if the item is still genuinely wanted, and still fits within the available budget, the decision can proceed. If it was forgotten before the month closed, or if the urgency that felt so real in the moment has dissolved on its own, no transaction happened, no money moved, no regret was generated. The list converts impulse from a decision point into a holding area, and what the holding area reveals, consistently, is that a meaningful share of the things that felt necessary in the moment did not survive even a few weeks of patient distance. The monthly review, which Kakeibo calls Hansei, is the mechanism that converts a single month's practice into a compounding system rather than a one-time exercise. Hansei means reflection, a structured habit of honest self-assessment that asks not just what you did but what you can do differently. In Kakeibo, it takes the form of a closed-month review conducted in the same physical notebook, comparing what you intended at the beginning of the month, your 4 foundational questions and your savings target, against what actually happened. Where did the buckets overflow? Which category consistently costs more than you assigned to it? Where did the optional bucket absorb spending that should have been questioned? What would you do differently if the month started again tomorrow? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the actual input that makes next month's system smarter than last month's, and the month after that smarter still. Now, the savings figure that gets attached to Kakeibo in most content built around it, typically stated as something like 35%, deserves more care than it usually gets. The figure is real. Japan's Family Income and Expenditure Survey records a savings rate of 37.8% for salaried worker households in 2024, and that number is not invented or inflated. But it represents disciplined budgeting households in a specific survey methodology, households that are actively tracking their finances, not a national economic average. A different, equally official measure, the national accounts figure for the same period, puts Japan's household saving rate significantly lower. Both figures are real. They are measuring different things, and citing the salaried worker survey figure as a national average is the kind of claim that invites a factually correct objection. The accurate and actually more useful framing is this: among households that actively practice structured spending tracking, savings rates measured by Japan's own official survey reach into the upper 30s. That is what a committed financial system achieves when it is actually used, and that framing is both honest and more persuasive, because it answers the implicit question the audience is really asking, which is not what the average Japanese household saves, but what this practice might actually do for me specifically. There is one more concept from Kakeibo's cultural context worth spending a moment on before the practical close, because it explains why the system is designed to improve over time rather than simply maintaining a baseline. Kaizen is the Japanese concept of continuous, incremental improvement, the idea that small, consistent adjustments in the same direction compound into something much larger than any single dramatic change ever could. In a Kakeibo practice, Kaizen operates through the Hansei review, every month's honest reflection producing one small adjustment to the next month's approach, a tighter optional budget here, a more realistic extra category allocation there, until the system fits its practitioner's actual life rather than a theoretical version of it. This is why people who use Kakeibo consistently report better results at month 6 than at month 2, and better results at month 12 than at month 6. The notebook is not just recording what happened. It is building, incrementally, a more accurate and more effective version of itself. The 7-day challenge to close with is this. Find a physical notebook. Any notebook, any pen, nothing needs to be purchased or downloaded. On the first page, write your 4 questions. How much do I have this month? How much do I want to save? How much am I spending? And how can I improve? Remove your savings target from your available balance before any spending begins. Divide what remains across 4 named categories. Survival. Optional. Culture. Extra. Write down every purchase, by hand, on the day it happens. Start a wish list on the last page for anything non-essential that presents itself during the week. At the end of 7 days, open the notebook and read what you wrote. Not to judge what happened. To see it clearly, many of them for the first time, and let what you see inform what you decide to do differently in week 2. The bucket in our opening scene does not have to keep leaking. The cracks were never the result of insufficient income or inadequate discipline. They were the result of a system, or the absence of one, that made every individual outflow invisible precisely at the moment when visibility would have mattered most. A pen and a notebook do not solve every financial problem. They solve the specific one that almost every financial problem starts with, which is the problem of not quite knowing, in honest detail, where the water actually went. What we have not covered yet is what happens when Kakeibo runs into the specific modern complications that did not exist in 1904, variable income that refuses to be predictable, subscription architectures that were specifically designed to avoid triggering any decision at all, and the question of what happens to a physical notebook practice when life goes fully mobile for weeks at a time. Those are 3 adaptations that Kakeibo's original framework requires and that almost nobody building content around this system has actually worked out. That is exactly where we are going next.